Okay, well, I think we're probably going to have our attendee count just continue to rise over the next couple of minutes, but we can go ahead and get started because we know there are a lot of questions that folks have that we want to make sure we get to, and the opportunity for the advisory council to introduce themselves and share some information about what their charge is and what their process is going to look like moving forward. I'm Christine Matsuda with Pakai Communications, and we have had the honor of being invited to support the Green Fee Advisory Council with communications and outreach to community as a part of this process. And so I'll be moderating today's discussion. With respect to a little bit of context, this is really intended to be an introduction to the advisory council members and an opportunity for them to share, led by Chair Jeff Michelina, who is on the line, to discuss with you all today what the bill sort of includes, Act 96, and what the parameters are of what the Green Fee Advisory Council will be tackling, what we can expect from the council in terms of process and general timeline. And then a lot of questions that you folks in the community have already been sending to us, and we're so grateful for that. We're going to share answers to a few that have been frequently asked already, and then open for discussion with everybody that's here. This is, as you know, a webinar format. And so because of the large number of participants, this isn't a sort of a typical meeting format. We're going to ask everybody to use the Q&A function. And we really are very interested in what questions you have. And our commitment is to try and get through as many as possible during the time that we have together today. If we aren't able to answer everyone's questions, we will follow up in one form or another. And so I want to make sure we're really clear about this just right at the top. We want your questions. So throughout the session, as the questions arise in your minds, please go ahead and put them in the chat. And I know many of you have been emailing your questions as well, and we really appreciate that. If we cannot get to every question answered either in the Q&A function or verbally with our panel today, the three ways actually that we're going to be following up is, one, we're launching a website that will house information about the Green Fee, the Advisory Council, and the work of the Advisory Council. And that will have FAQ there that we will continue to update as you ask us more and more of these really good questions. The second way is that if you have a very specific question that isn't necessarily something that the broader community would also be curious about, but it's something that's important to you, we may follow up with you individually and use the email registration, the email that you registered for the Zoom with to follow up with you if it's that kind of a question. And then the third thing is that we are launching an email tool as well. And so at the end of the presentation, there's going to be a QR code to sign up for that, but you can also find the sign up at the new Green Fee website, which is greenfeehawaii.org. And you can sign up for that email tool where we're going to be pushing out updates and information about the work of the Advisory Council kind of along the way. So let's just kind of overview the agenda. So we're going to have a discussion with the Green Fee Advisory Council. We have a couple of the members here. So Chair Jeff Michelina, Carmela Razuma, and Keone Kuoha are representing the council today. And we also have Will Kane from the governor's office, who will be able to answer some questions that are more kind of technical and specific about the legislation, which is certainly something we rely on for his expertise. We'll talk about process and timeline. We'll get into a little bit more specificity about Act 96. There definitely have been some questions that have come to our way already that are really good and helping to guide the information we're presenting to you all about the bill itself and what it does and does not do. And then, as I described, we're going to get into that, the Q&A portion, which is really the meat of what we're here to do with you all today. So with that, let's talk a little bit about purpose. The Green Fee Advisory Council is a group of 10 volunteer members who were selected by Governor Green and invited to volunteer for this purpose in August of 2025. And at that point of the announcement, we know that there's already a lot of interest in this council, what their charge is and what they're going to be doing in terms of process to help design the budget recommendations for this new source of revenue from the increase in the TAT. The goal is for this group to identify and prioritize these funding priorities that will ensure green fee dollars are invested in ways that bring the greatest benefit to Hawaii's communities and environment. This is both in the short term and the long term. And so those are interests and questions that the council is going to be balancing as they design processes and selection criteria, evaluation criteria. This really builds upon the work of the governor's climate advisory team that took place over the course of the year prior. And the work of the advisory council now, the Green Fee Advisory Council, is starting in August, and they've met already a couple of times, and their commitment is for a term of 1 year as well. So with that, I'd love to pass the mic to Jeff Michelina, the chair of the Green Fee Advisory Council, to talk a little bit about who is on the advisory council.
Mahalo, Christine. And we're so grateful to have Pa'akai working with us and supporting the communications for the Green Fee Advisory Council. But super grateful for all of you joining us this morning, spending time showing interest in really this unprecedented opportunity to devote ongoing resources to protect Hawaii's natural environment, to support sustainable tourism, and importantly, build our climate resilience. So it's really an exciting opportunity, and I think all of us on the council are dedicated and eager to get this right for this first go around. My name is Jeff Michelina. I'm chairing the council. Governor reached out and asked, and just really honored for the opportunity and joined by 9 other just fantastic folks. The governor wanted balance on this council, and he certainly got it. Fortunate also to be joined by 2 members with me today. Carmela Razuma, if you'd like to say hi.
Aloha. Hi, everyone. I'm Carmela. I call Waikiki home. My occupational home is Kilohana by the Hawaiian Council, where I really have the opportunity to serve as the Destination Stewardship Director. And what that means, a lot of words, but advocate tirelessly to center Aina culture, community, and decision, and in our decisions and all the work that we do, and especially as it relates to tourism. So grateful to be here, grateful to be in space with you all and to be on this council.
And then we're also joined by Keone Kuoha.
Aloha mai, o Keone Kuoha ko inoa, o Waimanalo o ahu ku'uoni hanau ina e he kupa no Makawao Maui. I'm very honored to be on this council and have the opportunity to help shape where the funding and how we actually look at climate resilience through this funding. My background is in Aina education, Aina-based education, culture-based education, as well as governance and nonprofit governance. I've applied for many grants in my life, so I understand that approach and have had the opportunity to evaluate grants as well. Aloha no.
Mahalo, Keone. In my background, I've had the good fortune of working with sustainability organizations in Hawaii for over a quarter century. And I'm passionate about Hawaii's sustainability and particularly Hawaii's opportunity to be a model for the globe for sustainable solutions. So I want to walk through some of the other council members because I think it's important to really share just the breadth of knowledge that we have. I was guessing that among the 10 of us, we have over 200 years of collective experience working in community, making things happen, leading organizations. So on the screen, you see Jeff Wagner. Jeff is the CEO of the Outrigger Hospitality Group. He leads a global portfolio of beach resorts, hotels, vacation condominiums, and retail operations, and has more than a 3-decade career in hospitality. Janice Ikeda is the founding CEO of Vibrant Hawaii, which advances resilience networks and community-led development, not only across Hawaii Island, but really looking statewide for that work. On the next page, we see Michelle Kaohane, who's Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President at Hawaii Community Foundation. She has a breadth of experience in nonprofit management, community-based economic development, and public policy advocacy. And then next to her is Jack Kittinger, who is the conservation scientist and research professor at Arizona State University, and he leads Conservation International's Center for Regenerative Economics. Eric Koh is the current CEO of Harold Cale Castle Foundation, with over a quarter century in ocean management, community development, and climate resilience across Hawaii and the Pacific. Leah Hong is the state director of the Trust for Public Land. Since 2006, she's been there, championing restoration of lands to Native Hawaiian stewardship and sustainable community spaces. And then Dennis Wong. Dennis Wong is with the UHC grant program, part of NOAA. He's actually wrote the book on homeowner protection against disasters, the Homeowner's Handbook to Prepare for Natural Hazards. I think it's in its 5th edition now. And he's a member of the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency's Hawaii Earthquake and Tsunami Advisory Committee. So bringing some great experience about disasters and home protection. And I think that rounds out our 10. So again, a great diversity of community, cultural experience, and expertise in this area to help guide our process. The main charges that the governor has tasked us with, we're seeing it sort of in 2 buckets here, our deliverables. One is really delivering this process and how to guide projects. So this is thinking through that evaluation criteria, that rubric. How are we going to view these proposals and analyze and vet them? We have just, Keone is leading a subcommittee on this effort. They've just had their first meeting and thinking through that difficult process of, what are all the dimensions that we want to look at? Obviously, there are myriad proposals and potential projects that this funding could support. And they have different dimensions, feasibility, there's a time aspect, there's risk involved, there's visibility, all sorts of different, cost benefit analysis. So looking at those different dimensions and seeing what we're going to use for our evaluation. That's number one. Number two then is that actual portfolio, that proposed budget of priorities for the governor then to include in his executive supplemental budget come January. Based on how the legislation was written for this is going to be a budget request by the governor to use funds in the general fund to support these projects. So we'll talk a little bit about the bill later. There were different iterations of this, but how the final bill landed is it's going to be a budget request out of the general fund to flow through departments. So ultimately, it is going to be up to the legislature to determine that final set of funding appropriations. We are a volunteer advisory council, and we are simply advising the governor on what we think that criteria for analyzing these projects are and what we think that optimal, first year portfolio looks like. So we have started. We've had a few meetings. We've had a few subcommittee meetings. There's been a lot of conversation. So the council started in September. We are looking at developing those criteria very, very quickly in October. And then, through October and November, reviewing proposals and starting to make those draft recommendations. We hope to have that finalized by December to provide to the governor, the council's recommendations. Now, on January 1st, the TAT increase begins, that 0.75% on top of the existing, and the funding starts to come in. The legislature then, through the spring, will be going through their process, adjourning probably in May. And then the fiscal year starts July 1st, and that's when funds will be supporting projects that are ultimately approved and appropriated by the legislature. So that's sort of the rough timeline that we're looking at. Time is really against us, and this is, I think, why we are asking for some patience here. This first go around is a real truncated process. And I think one of the outcomes that the council supports is developing a process on an annual basis going forward. So we have enough time to truly, collect and vet all the excellent projects that are out there that can be supported. But this first go around is going to be pretty tight, and we're going to have to make some really quick decisions on how best to spend this first tranche of green fee funds. So I know most of you are experts on the green fee, but we want to just sort of level set here. This was born out of, well, many years of advocacy from a lot of folks, and then Governor Green's leadership. Senate Bill 1396, which many of you supported for at the legislature, passed and was signed into law on May 27th as Act 96. In plain English, what it does is it increases the existing transient accommodations tax, that hotel tax, to 0.75% starting January 1st. As I mentioned, it applies to anyone staying in hotels, vacation rentals, and then for the first time, cruise ships as well. This addition will probably generate between 80 to 100 million or so annually. There is sort of this interesting little wrinkle for the first year because collection will begin January 1st. The fiscal year starts July 1st. So for that first budget cycle, it may be more, maybe 130, 140 million for that first year of TAT collection for the green fee. So again, this is going to be ongoing funding, and it's just such an exciting opportunity to provide that, certainty year over year that will be supporting natural resources, sustainable tourism, and climate resilience. But it starts January 1st. Now, the funding priorities, as outlined in Act 96, were pretty clear. There were 3 buckets that were specified in the legislation, and the mandate from the legislature is that the funds be equally expended in these 3 buckets. So we see these as buckets, but they're also intertied, and we'll talk to that in a second. But the first is environmental stewardship. So these are funds that support protecting Hawaii's natural resources and ecosystems, including native forests, native plants and animals, aquatic resources, coastal lands, and freshwater resources. Conservation and restoration projects will be prioritized. And we see by investing here, we really strengthen the environment as our first line of defense against disasters. And we know how this works. When we have dry, non-native grasses, AKA fuel, and can replace those with native trees or native plants, not only do we increase our resilience against wildfire, but we also help support aquifer regeneration, reduce runoff into our pristine waters and reefs, all sorts of co-benefits. And that's why really prioritizing environmental stewardship here is key. The next is hazard mitigation and infrastructure resilience. So this is looking at how do we make ourselves stronger than storms? What are the things we can do to increase our ability to withstand and recover from disasters? We're seeing an increase, obviously, due to climate change, of stronger storms, drought, heavier downpour events, and the like. So funding priorities here could be wildfire fuel breaks, flood control measures, hardening critical infrastructure, perhaps supporting homeowners to strengthen their homes so they can keep the rooftop when heavy winds come through. And the ultimate goal is just to build stronger, safer communities that can withstand future challenges. So this is really looking at structural resilience and natural resilience against disasters. And then the third and final bucket is sustainable tourism. So this is really looking at that interface between the natural environment and the visitor experience. And it's really about improving that experience for visitors while mitigating their impact on our natural environment. So these could be projects that protect natural resources for both residents and visitors, ensuring beaches, trails, and parks and other areas remain accessible, cared for, good signage, interpretation. It might include destination management efforts, such as improving state parks, state trails, and beaches. And really thinking, I think as many of us think about this, there's a certain reciprocity here as we, take these efforts and invest in things that the visitors experience. We're also supporting community, and those are the same places many times that locals will also experience. And if we can support local communities, there's a reciprocal benefit there for visitors. So that's a rough overview of those three buckets. We are, sort of defining those boundaries of those buckets, and then, as I mentioned, developing that evaluation criteria so we can help kind of shape our thinking around what are those priorities for the first year. So with that, I'll throw it back to you, Christine, for some FAQ and questions.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff. And I've been typing away, answering some of the really, really good questions that are coming in so far. Some of these are questions that folks who might only be listening on audio may also be curious about. So as we work through the Q&A that are coming in, even some of these that we've already answered in writing, we will maybe bring some of those back up to have some discussion amongst the group. So I mentioned at the top how grateful we are for everyone who has been sending in their questions in advance. We went ahead and digested a bunch of those, and the ones that we've been receiving that seem to be really like most of interest to people, as we've already kind of understood in advance of the webinar, we went ahead and put together these FAQ to just get the ball rolling. And then once we work through these that are the questions folks have already given us, then we'll get into some of the additional questions that people have already been submitting in the Q&A portal. And please keep giving us more questions. We really are here to share as much information as we have and be transparent with everyone. So for this, I'm going to be calling on our panelists to jump in. And this is where we're going to get into some of the more kind of technical specifics, right? So first question we've been getting a lot of: who decides how the green fee funds are spent? Will, can you take us through that decision-making process? Who has what role at what juncture?
Yeah, absolutely. And good morning, everyone. So essentially, as the process would describe, the council will make the recommendations to governor. He will put that in as part of his executive supplemental budget request. It'll follow the same timeline and process as the regular budget request, for lack of a better term. And ultimately, we will work with, and you folks, and we will work with the legislature to come out with the final decisions for those appropriations.
Thanks, Will. And what can the green fee funds be used for? You'll see that we have up on the slide, there are these three purposes, but the sort of natural follow-up question that a lot of people are asking about is what kinds of organizations also can implement those priority areas, projects in those priority areas. So Will, according to the legislation, what can the funds be used for?
Sure. So essentially, as we see on the screen there, right, those three main content areas or buckets that we've been calling them. And I think, part of this process is working with the folks on this call, the broader community, of course, and along with the council and all the experts there to kind of define what these things look like. We can find a lot of meanings for what a hazard mitigation would look like or sustainable tourism. So I think that's part of it. But essentially, it's got to be a tie-in with those three areas. And then the way that the legislation is set up now is the funding must go to a state department or agency. Now, originally proposed in the bill and various over the years, different things was ways to push it out into just directly appropriate funding to nonprofits or NGOs and those sort of things. That doesn't exist at the moment. We are going to work to maybe amend that in the future, hopefully. But right now, it would go to state departments and agencies, and we would use the normal process that's set up. So either some sort of procurement, or there are agencies and departments that have existing grant programs, pathways in order to kind of get out to the community and engage the folks that know how to do these projects the best.
And so I'll just add to Will's answer is that we know we're coming to you in an introductory kind of mode here. We're just getting started, and there are at the moment probably more questions than answers. And we are really committed to being transparent with all of you in the community about that. And we want to be clear about what questions the advisory council is asking and the solutions that they are seeking. And Will just really described a bunch of the things that the council has been tasking him with to go and make sure that there are pathways, that there are answers. And as we understand what those are, and the council is evaluating the options, that's why we're saying we're going to continue coming back to you folks. You know, there were some questions that I answered in the Q&A in writing that I'll just like surface again here because it feels really relevant. We will continue to do webinars like this that are for the public and for you know, community organizations to continue answering these really, really good questions as we have more information. Right now, we're saying here are our questions, and the council is actively working to gather up those answers and those solutions. And so we're going to come back to you on a regular basis in this kind of format on the website and the email tool, and you know, having conversations with folks who would like to get updates and have specific questions as well, to make sure that we're continuing to share updates and opportunities as we identify them, and as the council is able to get a little bit more I guess specificity around how these things are going to work. Now let's go to the next set of FAQ. Okay, so structurally, right, who pays the green fee? So Will, I'm going to go to you again for just a description of how the revenue process works.
Right. So as we know, if we travel inter-island or any of those things, or a staycation, there's that TAT charge that's put on our bill for when we stay in a hotel, a vacation rental, and now the cruise ships. So so that'll be continue to be assessed. It'll just increase by 0.75%. We anticipated a hotel room that's, you know, a few dollars a night. The majority of that obviously is paid by our visitors, but that additional revenue will come in, and that goes directly to the general fund.
And then, Will, there are a couple of relevant questions in the Q&A as like follow-ups to this one. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you them now. Stephanie, very glad to see you in the room. Stephanie had a question about how are we assuring that transient accommodation taxes are being collected from all accommodation types. She referenced a presentation to the Hawaii County Council earlier this month, reporting with a report showing that there's a substantial amount of uncollected TATs, so specifically for short-term vacation rentals, which is a great example of the question. How is the state going to ensure that TAT is being collected equitably across all accommodation types?
That's a great question. Excuse me. And Governor Green absolutely believes that everyone that is coming in and, you know, using these facilities and staying and lodging and stuff has to pay their fair share, and that includes short-term vacation rentals. So what we've done since then, you know, we've received a lot of feedback during session about this, and we've done a couple things. One is we've added positions, thank you to the legislature, in our enforcement division of Department of Taxation, in order to you know, have more investigators out there and kind of going off after the folks that are not paying what they're supposed to be paying, both TAT and GET. They've also engaged a firm that will use some technology to identify current taxpayers that may be under declaring or under reporting, excuse me, funds that they have received. In addition, we recently just engaged a company, and it was just a couple weeks ago, so they're just literally getting started. But this company, through the Department of Attorney General, they will be using technology and a process to go through and identify folks that are on a platform that may have not be paying their taxes for whatever reason, either inaccurate TAT number or those sort of things, and it's going to identify and then turn it over to DOTAX, and then they can enforce. And so we are committed to making sure that there's equity in everyone paying their fair share.
Great. Thank you so much, Will. So next question, can nonprofit organizations, community groups, or private companies receive green fee funds? This is a little bit of a trick question. So, and one of the most important topics that, we know our community is really curious about. So let's make sure that we're being really, really crystal clear about this. Can you just talk us through again what the legislation does, and then what we believe might be some of the fruitful pathways to explore to move green fee funds into the hands of community organizations who are really well suited to do some of the kinds of work that are prioritized by this bill?
Sure. So just to reiterate, originally, the original proposals for this included ways and mechanisms in order to directly fund nonprofits, NGOs, companies, whatever that looks like. The final bill that came out that is in law right now does not allow that. So everything has to flow through a state agency, a department, some sort of government function of the state. Now, with that, there are processes that exist. Now, there's the GIA process, which the legislature has not determined that they were going to put this as part of that. So we'll set that aside a little bit. But there's also, we have worked with all the departments to identify there are grant programs, existing grant programs, there's pathways, there are partnerships, there's all these things that exist in multiple departments that we think that we could also utilize along with the normal procurement process of a department, right? So if they're going out, it's not something they can do in-house, or they can do it quickly, or whatever that looks like. They can put out, procurement RFPs, RFIs, whatever that looks like, to then engage a third-party entity or private entity to complete the work. So we're going to encourage that. We're not trying to grow government with this. We're trying to do projects and make an impact.
Sorry, I'm muted. I anticipate that there are more follow-up questions coming on this. So as there are facets of this really important, sticky issue that folks want to understand better, please keep asking the follow-up questions. We want to make sure we answer them. Okay, let's go to the next set of questions. Okay, can green fee funding be bonded? This is something that I personally have heard a bunch of discussion about the possibility of leveraging these dollars to tackle really, really big issues that need large scale funding. Can the green fee funding be bonded, Will?
So as it stands now, no. Again, originally the bill had proposed to set up actually two special funds, but a special fund in order to that's the mechanism you need in order to bond out, essentially. So that does not exist. So right now, this is cash that's going into the general fund that would be appropriated as cash out for projects.
And so then this last question is one that we've also heard a lot of with the lawsuit with respect to cruise lines. What is happening with that? And then a sort of follow-up question that has been asked as well is that going to change the timeline of the decision making for allocation of these funds and appropriation because of the pending lawsuit?
So as far as we know, as it says here, the Attorney General's office is reviewing. They're going through. It's a complicated matter involving federal maritime law and commerce and clauses and all these things, which I'm not equipped to speak about. But we are moving forward. This is the law in the state. This will kick in January 1st, and so if the court rules that, whatever they rule, if they rule differently, then we will have to adjust and pivot and do that there. I would say that the legislature, put in a severability clause within the bill. And so if one part is found to be problematic or unconstitutional or something like that, it doesn't necessarily affect the other part. So again, I'm not a legal expert, so we're going to rely on that. But I think we feel that we are on solid ground, and we're going to continue to move forward.
All right, thanks so much. Okay, so now we're going to move into, and I guess we sort of already started into the questions that you all are putting into the Q&A. Just reiterate again, we structured this with the intent of spending a lot of time answering questions here. We are going to go for a full 90 minutes or until you guys run out of questions. And if we somehow are unable to answer all of them, which is totally possible, then I'll just repeat again, the ways that we will follow up are: one, updating the FAQ that are on the newly launched website, greenfeehawaii.org. Two, if you sign up for that email tool, we'll be using that to push out additional information. And certainly these really thoughtful questions that you all are bringing to the conversation today will inform the information that we know we need to share with the community. And three, if you have a really specific question that is more for, your specific situation that isn't necessarily something for the broader community, then we can follow up with you via email. But we are absolutely committed to following up and answering all of these questions. Okay, so Will has been doing a lot of heavy lifting on these questions so far. We're going to bring in everybody to answer all of these questions that are coming in. So maybe I'll go to Carmela and Keone to give voice to this next question. An attendee asks, curious how potential relationships between the advisory council members and applicants can and will be addressed to keep potential conflicts of interest transparent and ensure equity for applicants. So how are you folks thinking about the balance of having yourselves and your colleagues represent and have relationships with community and community-based organizations, and keeping that objectivity and transparency as you weigh funding priorities?
I can jump in and Keone can fill in any pukas I might have too. So, we are in Hawaii, we are in and of community. So I think other folks on the council, we are in the grocery store, we're in meetings, and folks come with wonderful ideas. And I think what I love about this council is that we've all been on both sides of this coin, many of us. We've written grants, we've evaluated them, we've been the people making the hard decisions. And so I think we're really leaning on the transparency, we're really leaning on the process, because my best friend in the whole entire world could have a wonderful project, but if it moves through a process and it doesn't become one that we would recommend to the governor and to the legislature, then that's going to drop off. And that just speaks to my own personal ethics. And I would like to believe that it is a same shared sentiment amongst folks on the council as well. So we are all in good company in that regard. And Keone, I would love to hear what you think.
Yeah, I echo what you're saying. I've been in and connected with INA-based education programs for 30 years. And so there are a lot of relationships there. That's where the evaluation and criteria committee, having a framework that really clarifies where our priorities are, and then having an evaluation tool, and we need to check bias in that tool. So we'll probably pilot a little bit, but essentially coming up with a tool that lays out why one project gains more points than another. Those things are under development, but those are some of the ways that we address potential conflicts of interest.
Yeah, mahalo. Really appreciate that answer. And Keone, maybe I can ask you, since I know you have a particular focus on developing that evaluation criteria, to answer this next question, and everybody else, please jump in. There have been a lot of questions that are posed in the Q&A already about when do proposals open? Is there an open call for proposals? And so maybe I can broaden that question to try and group some of these ideas together. I guess maybe a couple parts. One is, how do you folks view the gathering up of potential funding priorities for the evaluation process to look at and work through? Where are those ideas going to be coming from? And then I'll ask you guys a follow-up on that.
Yeah, certainly. So we're looking at a number of different plans. And, for instance, the governor's climate advisory team produces a plan. We have Aina Aloha Economic Futures has a evaluation tool. So there's been a lot of work that's already gone into identifying needs and priorities in this space. And so as a committee, we're looking through that and identifying those that intersect best with 96 and really crafting our evaluation framework from there.
So before I jump to my follow-up questions, because there are a bunch of them on this topic, anything else you guys want to add about where we're sourcing, where the advisory council is looking to source ideas and look to the good work that's already been done?
Go ahead, Carmela.
Oh no, Jeff, you got it.
Okay, I'll just build on what Keone shared in that there's a body of work out there done by the climate advisory team, by the departments themselves, by other community groups, and we're looking at all of this. We want to cast the net wide. We know that there's so many great ideas, there are needs out there, and we want to have as much visibility across the islands as possible. And we also want to manage expectations for this first year. As we're navigating these different pathways to be able to fund projects, we want to make sure that we're being honest about what is possible in this first year. But I would just add that this is the first year. If we do our job right, we're going to see this year after year after year. So if this first year is somewhat abbreviated and truncated and we can't cast the net as broad as we'd like, there will be future years and hopefully some amendments to both the legislation and the process so we can have, again, full visibility and really address the needs as we see them. We've been sort of talking as a group. Janice Ikeda shared an analogy, which I think she maybe borrowed from someone else, about this idea of planting kalo versus planting koa. So
yeah.
Are we looking at these near-term projects and some early visible wins that people can feel and experience in the community on the ground? And then also thinking, longer term, what are those not shovel ready projects that are going to require some development planning, thinking through across agency and community? So we have our eye on both, but this is all hands on deck. We really need everyone's voice, highlighting both the needs out there, potential projects, and potential partners.
So I'll add a couple of things, just again to plug the tools that we're standing up kind of in real time. I think our website went live like 2 hours ago, so we're moving really quickly here. The website will have an input portal, and for that sort of like input portal, we're looking for input in a number of different areas. One certainly is going to be what kinds of initiatives, ideas, problems you folks in the community think need to get raised in terms of prioritization for funding. That's definitely something we're going to be taking input on through the website. And then, in the spirit of transparency, I think that the council is still designing at this point what exactly the input process more formally is going to look like. So that's something that we're going to need to come back through these update kind of mechanisms that I've been describing throughout the course of this call so far, to say, okay, now the council has had the opportunity to design what the call exactly is going to be looking like, and how and when these ideas are going to be taken in, because we also want to make sure that when we issue that call, there's a clear process delineated of how those ideas are going to be honored, and that the work that all you folks in the community space are putting into designing those ideas and designing those funding priorities for the council to consider, we want to make sure that that is being appropriately met, and that you have a really clear sense of how those ideas are going to work through the process. So more to come on that. One other follow-up question that I think is related to this, around the sort of like, will there be a call for proposals coming out soon? How will all of that work? I think that also ties back to the conversation from a minute ago about how the council is currently doing research with state agencies to understand their grant making and RFP processes, so that when those processes can open an RFP or put out a call for grants, or however those different processes work in those state agencies, that can be really clear. But you guys, I'm gonna say something and I want you to tell me if it's not correct. But I think part of the work is to identify what all those things are, so that we can communicate to you folks, this is what the pathways are going to look like. And there's probably not going to be only one single RFP for community-led projects. That'll probably be a little bit different across these different funding pathways in these different state agencies. So I'm putting that out there for our panelists to react to. Is that a correct statement? Any revisions that you want to make, clarifications?
That as far as process, that's an absolute correct statement. And there'll be multiple departments that'll be able to hopefully work with the community and push these projects out. This isn't just one and done. We're looking at at least initially 8 or 9 different departments to get started on this work, right? And of course then attached agencies along with that. So we're trying to find as many pathways as possible to do the variety of work that's needed.
There's a handful of questions here about whether funding is going to go to counties. There's a specific question, I think it was mentioned earlier, of state parks and beaches. Why not county parks and beaches? And what is that distinction about? As well as some questions about will counties end up getting a cut of the green fee revenues aside from the state departments? So Will, can you address that?
Sure. So I'll work backwards. So do they get a cut? No, this is this funding goes directly to the state treasury and the state funding. However, every year in the budget, there are subsidies, what we call subsidies, but appropriations to the counties, and for a variety of projects. And so that mechanism still exists. That the legislature can decide to appropriate directly to a county for specific projects or whatever that looks like going forward.
Okay, and then along these same lines, but a little bit of a different question, there are a couple of questions here about the geographic spread of funding allocations, or determine recommendations, I guess we should say, about where physically, geographically, the money is going to go. So we know earlier in the presentation, we were talking about those 3 priority areas that are identified in the legislation. Those are not geographically specific. They're more like issue areas. How is the council, and maybe this one, Jeff, if you want to start off, and then we can ask everybody else to chime in, thinking about geographic spread of the funding as opposed to by issue?
Certainly, yeah. And this is part of Keone's task with a subgroup looking at evaluation criteria. How are you going to look at that dimension geographically? And yeah, we really want to be thoughtful about that. Again, there's going to be some competing sort of dimensions to that evaluation, but certainly geographic diversity. I also saw some questions about, are there council members representing different islands? And I think we all have a view on the entire state. We do have some expertise from certain islands, but again, we'll be calling on you for those island-specific sort of ideas and projects. But I just want to quickly mention, I'm flipping through these 63 questions right now, or actually plus 27, and there's just some fantastic, thoughtful questions in here, and I really appreciate just that the feedback and the question and how folks are thinking about this. I know this webinar is meant to sort of share out, but I feel like we are getting so much in from you on how to think about these issues and the questions that we need to really be resolving through this process. So mahalo for that.
Does anybody else want to jump in about the sort of question about geography versus other different ways of spreading out the funding recommendations?
Yeah, I would just add a couple things. When, Governor had directed me and to work with the group to put together this group, it was to find broad representation, both of experiences and knowledge and those things, but also mindfulness of folks across the state. So we have a level of equity that is built into this process. And so from my perspective, but the council will ultimately make the final recommendations here that it's based on need and those sort of things, right? So we want to make sure we're evaluating across the state and where we can make the biggest impact, and then work from there.
Great. Thanks so much, Will.
Additionally, I think the question about distribution across counties kind of touches back on our criteria that the council is coming up with. And, even though it's still very early, that specific idea has come forward in our evaluation and criteria committee. The idea that especially our neighbor island communities with smaller populations, and so sometimes the tourist infrastructure and impact feels like more. Living here on Maui, it certainly feels that way. So I think that there is some sense across the state of how do we equitably address that issue. Other criteria, and again, this is still very formative. Other criteria that we're looking at are shovel readiness for projects, leverage, whether a project brings in partners and sort of multiplies the effect of funding. Community support is certainly a big part of whether projects should move forward. Capacity, the capacity of the requesting organization department to fulfill a project at this point. Impact, let's see, certainly feasibility, cost benefit, those kind of things are all in the mix of the conversation right now. And again, we just had one conversation, but just really trying to figure out how do we look at the array of proposals that are going to come in front of us and discern which are the ones that are going to be the most impactful to the purpose of Act 96 and certainly for the well-being of the people of Hawaii. So we have a tall order in front of us, but that's some of the stuff that we're working on right now.
So, Keone, that's a beautiful bridge into another set of questions that I'm seeing here in the Q&A around so if you have a project or initiative, an idea that bridges all three areas, which, to me as a community member, that sounds like a really good thing if we're finding ways of, single initiatives, single projects that are going to have impact across all three of these really important priority spaces. How will those be treated when you're thinking about, equal funding in these three different buckets?
I don't know where we're going to end on that and how they will be treated, but this has already been a conversation. And we're working within the parameters of Act 96, and so it requires equal distribution across the three buckets. And so one of the challenges that we're looking through is, okay, well, we believe that having multiple sort of intersection between the buckets could be really good for a project and for its outcomes. But how do we functionally evaluate that and maintain the connection with the requirement for equal funding? So it's a small challenge in front of us. We do see potential value in projects that address more than one bucket, but we also have to figure out that funding equity question.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I'm going to go back to the TAT topic because there are a bunch of questions that are coming up on this as well. So we're going to take these in steps. So one is, and Davis, very happy to see you on the Zoom. Thank you for coming. Will this impact the portion of TAT that goes to HTA for cultural and environmental stewardship grants? That's actually a question that's been posed by multiple of our webinar participants.
Again, that's a decision made by the legislature. I would hope if it does impact, it would be in a positive way, and look at an increase in that. But it won't. The bill doesn't make any impact to like distribute or change or any of those things.
Okay, thank you for that. And there's also a question here to just maybe take a little bit of a further step back and have a description of what the, prior to the green fee, where all the TAT revenue was already going. And then now we're layering on this additional, revenue source.
Right. So the TAT is, along with the GT, one of the largest revenue streams for the state. So, I mean, it goes to everywhere you look around. That's where it goes. It goes into, public parks. It goes into the operations of the state and the tax system. It goes into, human services and the Department of Health and all of those things. So the TAT, almost, I think it's 850, 900 million. It'll increase now. Those go to fund the state's operations across the state and basically everything it touches.
And then again, just with respect to the green fee portion of this and how when we're collecting revenue for the different funding cycles, if we could go back and just clarify that a little bit. So for
Sure.
example, there's a question here, do we know if we'll be able to allocate funding for 18 months since collection begins in January? So as we're getting geared up here and the start of the clock does not match the state's fiscal year, how does that work?
Yes, that's exactly right. So collections start January 1. The fiscal year starts in July 1 of 2026. And so what we will be proposing as part of the supplemental budget request is essentially 1 year of for the fiscal year, but it's containing 18 months of the funding.
Okay, super. So we have a clarification question. For a community-driven project, the funds would be allocated at the state level and trickle down to a community org for it to be implemented by this group. It seems there's no way to directly fund community organizations in their work. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So let's make sure that we get that really clear. So describe again how we think the pathways hopefully will work. And then, again, we're going to be following up as we have more concrete answers.
Sure. So right now there is no pathway, there's no mechanism, there's nothing that allows us or the legislature to say, here is this money going to ABC nonprofit. It doesn't exist. But what could happen is if we identify a department that has an existing grant program, it has existing pathways for disbursement of funds, they could say, the legislature could decide, okay, it's going to go to this department and it could go into this grant program. And then that department or agency would then follow their process, whatever that looks like. And it's different. And we are compiling these and we're going to be putting these out on the website publicly so folks are aware. Some of you may already be engaged in those, but we want as many people to know about these. And that way they can go through that. So that's one. And then the other one, as we talked about, departments have the ability to do procurement for things that they're not able to do or, for a variety of reasons. And that's another way where they would go a competitive process or whatever, and then engage organizations, private, nonprofit, public, whatever that looks like, to do the work.
Thanks very much, Will. Any other clarifications or additional thoughts that our other panelists might want to add? Well, I'll add one, just in the spirit of somebody who's been receiving a lot of these questions from you folks. I just want to make sure that we're reflecting clearly that the intent and desire, as I understand it from the council, is to make sure that that can happen. And that seems to be a desire that's shared pretty much across the board. There's certainly a recognition that in a lot of these spaces that are articulated in the legislation as the requirements for what these funds should go to, the expertise And the ability lies in community, with community organizations and nonprofits. And I know organizations who have been doing this work for a long time. And there's definitely a recognition of that. And so my observation of the work of the council so far is that there's a focus on trying to figure this out. There's a focus on actively seeking out what those pathways and mechanisms are going to be to enable that flow to occur.
This has been a big topic with us from the beginning, trying to figure out how do we get the money into the hands of the people that are doing the work and into the community. So yeah, I suspect we'll keep finding as many creative ways as possible. And great to have Will. Will's our shepherd through the maze of state departments and processes.
Yeah, and Christine, thank you, and Keone, for sharing all that. And as again, a person who, and Keone feels as in the same boat, who has written many grants and RFP bids, like we've been on your side. So even the questions that I'm seeing in the Q&A about, types of, fiscal sponsorship, or what kind of line items, what should the budget look like those are things that we are with you. Like, we've been on your side. And so just know that whatever process comes out, you have many hands and brains and hearts that have been through these processes and deeply care about community and about getting these funds out as equitably and as efficiently as possible. And so I drink a lot of coffee because I feel like this is a big thing, and we're all working really hard. So grateful for the trust in all of you in us and in helping to make this as equitable as possible.
And I just want to build on what Christine and you all shared right now. This is a priority for us. I mean, we recognize there are folks in community on the ground doing the work, and how do we use this green fee to really leverage those efforts and augment them and expand them and multiply? There's expertise in the community, and we see it, across the state. So this is a high priority for us, finding mechanisms to be able to uplift and support those existing efforts.
And I would just add one more thing, that this is a living process, right? And so when we're looking at this, while we have to work this year within this framework that we've described, even talking with the council and community members, I am sure there'll be changes. And I think we would be looking to have that input to see how can we make this process better while still, maintaining the public trust and the funds and the transparency and all those things. So that's a conversation we want to continue to have.
So speaking of future changes, there are a couple questions here about the legislative process and the Green Fee Advisory Council's role. So, when we were talking about the work right in front of us, there's so much for the council to do before the legislative session that we've really been focusing today's conversation on what is up on deck for the next couple of months. But what happens for the advisory council once the legislative session begins? The specific question that I'm looking at here in the chat is what kind of advocacy role would or should the council play representing the recommendations that they've offered to the governor? So that's one question. And then I think the tee off of what you just said, Will, is if the council and community members identify amendments that are needed to the bill, we've already kind of implied that in a couple of stages here in our conversation today. What's the process for that going to look like? So how about I'll pick on some people here. So Jeff, as the chair, what's your view on the role the advisory council, or perhaps you as chair personally, might take during the legislative session in advocating for the recommendations that you provided to the governor?
Honestly, I think this will be a key role for us. This hasn't been discussed explicitly on the council, but I see this, that we signed up for, not only helping develop this process, the evaluation criteria, reviewing the projects, but then when that portfolio is complete, really being that voice and helping to advocate, providing the rationale and the understanding of how we arrived at that particular set of projects, and then advocating. Ultimately, like we shared, it's the legislature's kuleana to decide what that final appropriation is. But if we do our jobs well, we'll have a strong basis for why those particular projects were selected for year one and why it makes the most sense. So yeah, we've talked a little bit about, I mean, gosh, we could use some changes to legislation, and we'll sort of defer to the administration on that and what's needed, and the community as well. But for this first year, you know, advocating for that set of projects, I think that's going to be on us. Hopefully, too, with community advocates will join us too and see the value in that final selection that we land at.
And just to kind of echo that, I was in a different venue yesterday and talking about a program that was wonderful, and the community loves it, local business love it. And you know, our testament to the group that was present was, if you love this so much, talk to your legislator about how much you love this program that's already funded by tax dollars. And so, you know, this is a Kako thing. It's us, it's you, and so we invite you to kind of share in this process with us, because this is something we're creating all together.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just want to punctuate a couple of those points. We're looking pretty far ahead now at this point, given how much needs to get done in the next couple of months leading into the legislative session. But it is smart for us to start thinking about what that looks like, because you know, as Will has laid out for us, what this actual kind of decision-making process looks like means the advisory council will make a set of recommendations that are, you know, community informed, really well researched, based on the kind of evaluation criteria that Keone described, that that the group is designing now, drawing upon the, you know, tremendous body of work that already exists. And if community is not able to come around that and support that body of recommendations as it moves through the legislature, I think, you know, we've all had the unfortunate experience of seeing really, really good bills kind of fall apart as they move through that process. And so certainly we will be thinking about what is needed to help shepherd that through once we get into session. Because that is going to be a really important part of getting to a successful budget on the back end of that legislative process. Okay, so that was a really big topic. Regroup and get into some of these other really good questions. So here's some really kind of interesting ideas. And maybe if we want to go back to that slide as we're just talking through some of these, like, I guess, test cases of like, what about this? What about that? Can we go to the slide, please, that shows the prioritization, the 3 prioritization buckets as outlined in the legislation? Okay, so let's like run a couple of discussions around some specific ideas. So here's one that was entered into the chat, into the Q&A. As Hawaii is not significantly invested in establishing dedicated emergency medical services ambulance bases across all the islands, will the Green Fee Advisory Council consider EMS ambulance base development as an eligible hazard mitigation and resilience infrastructure, and explore how Green Fee revenues could be leveraged alongside other state funding to strengthen EMS and fire response capacity as climate-linked resilience infrastructure? So, you know, we're still developing criteria, but how does that strike you guys? Does that kind of a thing, in theory, fit into that second bucket?
I'll defer to the council. I think, yes, I mean, let me say this, the discussion, although started prior, really took on a lot, this urgency after the Lahaina fire. So I think when we're looking at when we need responses, whether they're fire or medical or those sort of things, I think that should be up for consideration. Now, whether it's going to go through like Christine described, we'll defer to the council and their criteria, and we have to think that through, because what I've seen is you can start to like try to pull in all sorts of different things, right? And all of these things are so worthy and impactful, but we'll have to create some sort of, you know, lines and criteria for that. But anything, you know, fire mitigation, fire response, those sort of things, I think in my mind is important.
Similarly, there were some specific questions about cesspool conversion as a potential idea. There was a question posed in the Q&A about coral reef restoration. Are those the kinds of things that generally you guys see as fitting into these areas, or would you say it's premature as the criteria are still being developed? How does that sit with you guys?
I'll say, I was looking to Keone here, but I will say I think that it is a bit premature. I mean, we acknowledge there are just a plethora of potential projects that could be funded. We've heard everything from geothermal development to cesspools to, yes, shoreline erosion issues. So we do need to put some boundaries on this and keep it focused. I mean, everything. I mean, I've always said it too. Like everything touches climate. But at some point in time, we're going to have to sort of rein it in and look at the legislative intent here and where we can make the greatest impact in these particular budgets. And that doesn't diminish the importance of those things at all. It's just for this particular funding source, what is the intention and how can we make sure it goes to the highest and best uses in these buckets? But premature, still sort of sorting that through.
So related question, and Carmela, I'm going to go to you on this one since you were speaking about equity earlier. Give us your thoughts on ensuring equity for small, low-income, rural frontline communities to have their needs met with respect to infrastructure resilience. So the examples that this person is posing, wildfire and flood mitigation, food security, flood mitigation, renewable energy, digital equity, like, the list is an example of how many different ways in which these things can be considered. So how are you personally as a council member, and how are you encouraging your fellow members of the council to think about equity?
Ooh, that's a good question. I feel like I could talk for a long time about equity, but I think at its core, and I'll speak personally first before I speak kind of through our process that we're creating as a council, is the need is high, right? The demand is high for what these funds could look like and the potential impact it could have in our communities. And for projects like this is why we're here, right? And this is what we want. The intention is not just in addition to all of the buckets, like having it serve and be of service to folks that have been historically disenfranchised from access to funding like this. And so that was a term with a lot of jargon, but ultimately the how is why. I don't want to be dramatic and say I'm losing sleep at night, but why we're working so hard and trying to be so diligent about making sure that the process that we create and the criteria and the evaluation rubrics can really target these kind of communities where it is needed the most. And Keone, feel free to chime in there if there's anything else you'd like to add too.
Yeah, I mean, equity, there are a bunch of ways of looking at that, and at the same time, we have a purpose to these funds, and it's easy to sort of because there's so much need, it's easy to start looking beyond the purpose and be like, well, we really should, that we need that to happen and this to happen. Yes. And because there's a need for addressing climate stressors, and more specifically what did Benjamin call it? Climate shocks. That's exactly what the climate advisory team was looking at, and the bottom line for them was saving lives and reducing financial loss. And so that's one of the sort of points that we're looking at and be like, okay, that's a pretty clear parameter for how we determine the funding. It's saving lives. How do we save lives in the future from these climate shocks, and how do we reduce the financial loss to individuals as well as our institutions.
Thank you very much for that, Keone. So I'm just keeping half an eye on the clock here. I think we have about 15 minutes left in the 90 that we had set up for this webinar. And we just, first of all, want to say thank you for all you folks who are setting aside such a big chunk of your day to spend with us. It's really a testament to your all's commitment to community and to the importance of getting this right. And we're really grateful for your time. panelists, if you would like to join me and the support team in answering questions in writing as we're going to, please feel free to jump in. We want to make sure we get to as many folks as possible. And since we still have 63 open questions, I just am aware that we want to, of course, answer as many as we can. And then we're probably going to have some more follow-up to do with folks as well after this. So thank you for your patience and your grace with us, everybody. Okay, so we're just going to keep going through as many as we can to see how many we can cover before we have to wrap up. There's a question here about how the departments put in a priority list about 6 months ago, the departments of the state, and this included specific Department of Ag projects, for example, among others. And how will these past priorities be incorporated? So Will, I think I can pick on you for this question, hopefully, as I believe you were involved in that initial ask of getting folks to start thinking about what kind of projects might be available, sort of shovel ready for this type of funding. So can you describe that list and then kind of where those projects or those lists of projects are currently?
Sure. So yeah, so last session during about the middle towards the end, the legislature asked if we could provide a prioritized list from multiple departments that would, these buckets weren't clear to define, but they were the genesis of where these came from. So obviously some of these were just funded through the normal budget process, but the majority were not. But it's looked at that now we're going into this process. Budget and Finance will be issuing a finance memo that we're finalizing hopefully this week or the beginning of next that will describe the process, which is very similar. It'll run parallel and similar to the normal budget process, but it's a carve out in accordance with the legislation so that we can clearly address this, the green fee projects, the proposed green fee projects, and get the council to weigh in on that. And then they'll be moving forward. So those departments that did that work prior, that's not a wasted effort. I think in just, discussions I've had with some of the directors and folks there, they'll be using that as their basis for the green fee request moving forward.
Super. Thank you very much. So, all right, let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, this is a really good question. And it sounds like it's a half question, half suggestion. So maybe we can put this into the mix for future discussions amongst the council. Based on the funding pathway that was just described, how can the advisory council advise on ways to alleviate potentially significant administrative burdens for those directly implementing green fee projects, many of whom could be small nonprofit groups? I think this is a really important point, that there's intent, and then there's also the sort of like administrative and logistical reality of working through these kinds of different procurement processes that we're saying the council is exploring right now. So any thoughts or reactions to this from the group?
We're expecting in our committee work, we're framing it and be like, okay, what do we want to see? And as we learn more about the processes, as we get proposals from the state, we're going to see where our hopes can be applied this year and where we might have to turn them into recommendations to bring to the full council and hopefully further than that. So I expect to have a bunch of recommendations coming out of our work this year.
In addition to this, and I just want to, this is maybe dangerous, but speak to my personal capacity, that I think that this challenge that we face, and a lot of this work was born out of the tragedy in Lahaina and the Maui fires, is new. And I think some of the old systems don't serve this new reality that we're in. So I do hope that we can explore with the administration, with the department heads, new ways, new vehicles to deploy funds where they're needed quickly, and think creatively about how we can do that.
Okay. There's also a question here, and Will, I'm going to ask you to answer this because I've heard you speak to it before. I'm going to just summarize for the purpose of trying to be brief with our time. Is some of the green fee funding appropriation intended or not intended to help agencies staff up?
Yeah, so I mean, I think if there's a need for staff in order to manage, like we talked about, these administrative, burdens, right? So private companies, nonprofits, all those things, they would have burdens too, but the state may not have this. And as Jeff described, if it doesn't exist now, it may be something that we have to look at. But what governor has discussed is that we want to do things, actual projects and things to get out there, and not, let's add 100 new workers to all this, to do this, but let's use what's out there already, both state and in the public sector, and figure out how we can work together more efficiently. So there may be some additional staffing, but I would hope that that would be minimal.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. Let's see. Since the green fee funds, this is another Will question. Since the green fee funds are being held in the general fund, how protected are they from encroachment by the legislature for other needs?
So, so they're just part of the stew of the money, right? So when you put money into your own bank account, into your checking, maybe you get a check from grandma, maybe you get your paycheck, maybe you get whatever, but it's all in there. When you look at your balance, that's what it is, and that's where you decide to spend it. So the legislature has requested that we submit this here, but ultimately they decide how those appropriations roll out and where that money goes to.
And follow up on that, is there a mandate to spend all the green fee funds flowing into the G fund on these specific green fee projects? If 130 million goes in, does 130 million come out in projects during that fiscal year?
Ideally, yes, but there is nothing in the law or anywhere that says there's a 1-to-1 ratio. So the legislature, just a scenario, could decide, yes, we're going to do exactly what the amount and make sure that's all green fee. They could do more. They could say, you know what, we want to do 200 million, whatever. But they could also say, we're only going to do 80 million. So that decision is theirs. And obviously you folks can discuss with them.
Okay. This is another one that seems like half question, half suggestion, and a really good one. Can you speak to the envision framework or plans to document and monitor success of future projects, i.e. track implementation progress? With this high visibility effort, both within Hawaii and nationally, this seems like an important piece.
I'm happy to jump in here, but would love to hear from Carmela and Keone as well on this. Just as you said, Christine, there are a lot of eyeballs on this. This is really first in the nation. I think we owe it to both, the visitor industry, the folks who are paying into this, and communities and future generations to be very clear and explicit about where the funding is going, and hold folks accountable to execute those projects, but also see it. I mean, success looks like people feeling it, seeing it, visitors seeing the improvements, community members seeing an improved environment, a safer, more climate resilient environment. So, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but we'd love to see some sort of dashboard or something that shows where the funds are going and then sort of keeps track of those projects so people have good visibility into the impact that's happening on the ground thanks to the green fee. So yeah, we hope to keep this very, very transparent and visible once the appropriations are made.
Okay. Next question from Rep. Lowen. As I recall, the use of the word equal was intended to ensure that all of the revenue generated was expended for the outlined purpose. So revenue equals expenditures, not intended to say that it has to be equally divided between the buckets. That interpretation seems unnecessarily restrictive. Thank you so much for the really good question.
So I'll take this one. So I think, again, we're going to propose a budget. The legislature ultimately decides. And I will say, let me just go back. Rep. Lowen was incredibly impactful in getting this legislation across the finish line, right? So she was a tremendous help. And so I do want to acknowledge that for sure. But the way we read it, right, if I'm looking at the actual language, it says proceeds derived from these, these funds and all this pursuant shall be expended equally to advance specific projects to, and then it has the 3 buckets description. And so in our interpretation, that's what will be needed. But this is, it's a good question because it's something that maybe needs clarification down the line, or something that we could look at to be more prescriptive or less, whatever we think works in the future.
Thank you very much. So cognizant of time, I'm going to kind of wrap us up a little bit here and again, restate our commitment to following up on all of these questions. You will see many new FAQ populating, I think, on our newly launched website, which is greenfeehawaii.org. We'll also be very shortly sending out a first email blast through our email tool. And again, we'll encourage everyone to visit that website, greenfeehawaii.org, to sign up for that email tool. As a follow-up to this session, you're going to get an email from us saying, thank you so much for your participation. And that'll also give you the ability to link back to that website and sign up for future emails. We're assuming that your folks' participation today is an indication of your continued interest. And so thank you very, very much for that. And we look forward to continuing to be in conversation with you all. I think to summarize some of the important themes that I've heard from our panelists today, first of all, thank you for your passion, your commitment, and your engagement with the council, even in the context of this 90 minutes, to improve the process and ask the really important questions and insert these topics that really need to be discussed by the council, so that it will make their conversations and their decision-making process better. Another key theme that I hear emerging is that there are a lot of questions, and the Green Fee Advisory Council is really just starting out. They've had a couple of meetings so far, and this introductory webinar really is that, to say, here's who the council is and the big charge in front of them and the questions that they are really interested in pursuing. And so it's the start of this process, certainly not the end. And we look forward to, and thank you in advance for your continued engagement in this. I just want to open now for any closing thoughts from our panelists before we adjourn the webinar.
I'll start. One of my favorite Aina spaces that I love being a part of and restoring, the Kumu has taught me so much about cultural practices and all the native plants. Always says that the work that we do is slow and intentional, but makes generations of impact. The work we as a council are advised to do is not slow, but it is intentional. And so I'm grateful to all of you for being here and for giving us the grace as we're working through this process to make it be of service to Aina and to community and to all of you as much as possible.
For myself, I'm excited to see the outcomes of our work this year, and how we manage to clarify priorities and direct really important funding to critical actions in our community. Yeah, and thank you folks for joining us today. Aloha.
Thank you, Carmela, Keone, and everyone on the council. But listening to the questions today and just seeing all of the great input, I feel like it's not 10 of us, it's 300 of us today, and it's literally hundreds of thousands of us across the state all contributing to this outcome. I mean, this is truly a generational opportunity, not just for this funding tranche here, but generations to come. And we need to get it right. So all of this input is incredibly useful. We see it as really working together with integrity, transparency, and this urgency, because we have a short window for this first go around. But through it, we can really leave a legacy of resilience and stewardship and equity for generations to come. So mahalo everyone for your incredible input and patience with us as we navigate this process.
Jeff said it perfectly. Mahalo, everyone.
Okay, well, with that, I'll just encourage everybody one more time to keep an eye on the newly launched website, greenfeehawaii.org, and to just reiterate a question that was asked a number of times. This webinar recording will be made available publicly on that website in the coming days. That's also where you can go ahead and sign up for email updates moving forward. And we're going to keep that website really live and vibrant with information as it becomes available. So thank you again for spending the time with us this morning. We're truly grateful for your passion and commitment, and for all of the really incredibly important input that you folks have contributed and really thoughtful questions that you asked. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Mahalo nui.